Hi, everyone. My name is Chetan Venkatesh, and I'm the CEO and co founder of Macrometa. And I am delighted to be here today with a very, very special guest to talk about a strategic new partnership that Macrometa has. A little bit about me and Macrometa before I get started and introduce my special guest. I've been in the data and data infrastructure space for 20 years, so don't let this, devilish youth, fool you. I've been around quite a bit, and I've been a part of four startups in this space so far. And I'm excited about edge computing because it's a problem that literally, has been around for a while, but it's taken some time to gain the kind of momentum and relevance. And it's something that's going to become a very critical infrastructure over the next 10 years especially. It's going to become a primary form of cloud computing. At least that's my belief and thesis. And my guest today is someone who's actually seen that journey over 20 years as a part of Akamai. So Andy Champagne, welcome to the show. And, I'm so excited to have you here as our special guest. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and about our partnership?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm super excited to be here, and the edge is pivotal to Akamai, and I think we were really the first company to start defining and talking about the edge, and we're really excited to be working with you here today, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm senior vice president in the CTO office at Akamai, so I'm responsible for a lot of our technology strategy work, as well as our Akamai Ventures efforts, where we do strategic investments. And we're really excited, and you folks probably saw the release earlier today and the other PR around it, that Akamai is a strategic investor in Macrometa. And, the edge is just a technology that has propelled the internet forward, right? The internet started, and obviously there's distributed tendencies in the internet architecture as it started, but having data be distributed around the internet and having data resident at the edge is something that Akamai has been working on for over 20 years. And, as we met with the Macrometa folks and the whole team here, we are very excited about, continuing our work with them in helping to make, the edge a reality for the internet. So super excited to be here and looking forward to our chat today.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about a fair number of things today. And, I want to start with the topic of origin stories because that's really important. The why of why we do things really starts, with that fundamental big question that we ask ourselves at the onset, right? And I know Akamai's had a fascinating, 20 years of becoming one of the most important pieces of infrastructure that makes the internet work. I mean, without the CDN layer, the web would not have been, as successful and certainly not as scalable where billions of people can use it every day. You've been right at the center of that for 22 years as one of the earliest folks at Akamai. And I'd love to hear from you about Akamai's origin story and your origin story.
Sure. So I'll do my best on the Akamai one. So I've been at Akamai for about 22 years. Akamai is going to celebrate its 25th year in business next year. So it's a, quite a long track record for a company in the technology space. And our origin story really dates back to the mid to late 90s. When websites were trying to expand, big websites of the time were trying to expand based on buying bigger and bigger servers and putting them all in one location. And, a lot of, and I won't name names, but a lot of the biggest e-commerce sites at the times were having issues scaling and reliability and availability issues. And our co-founder, Dr. Tom Layton, and his graduate student at the time, Danny Lewin, came up with this fantastic technology for distributing content dynamically around the internet based upon where the user was. And the premise was that instead of having these big centralized servers in one location, you would shatter those servers into 1,000 pieces and have those servers resident close to the user. And that was probably really the birth of the edge. And, we can talk about other examples that were rolling around at the time, but that was really the beginning of Akamai. And it has been a 20 plus year journey on taking that initial inspiration around moving from large centralized stacks in big data centers, connected to peering points, to putting content, applications, and security really close to the user to enable high performance delivery. And, my origin, so that's the Akamai origin story in a nutshell. And my origin story is I started in the networking space in the mid to late 90s. And, before Akamai, and saw all of the challenges and trials and tribulations that came across with trying to run a lot of data into centralized data centers. And it just frankly didn't work and it didn't scale. And Akamai started up, and it was the potential solution. So I had to be a part of it. And me and some other colleagues and friends that I knew who went over there really started the network group with building out, kind of the technology and infrastructure behind this very large distributed network. And that was about 20 years ago, and here we are today. And it's been a fantastic journey. And I've got to say, it's been a fun one, especially when we meet folks like-minded, folks like yourself and the whole team at Macrometa who are passionate about moving against centralization. And centralization is good in some ways; it makes it easy to start. But as we start to get towards the scale that the internet's evolving on, we've got to move towards a relationship with the edge, where developers and data are instantly available and resident at the edge. So let me turn the tables back on you. You got a really, interesting origin story and very brief 20-year arc out of me. I'd love to get a bit of your backstory and specifically the inspiration and backstory behind kind of Macrometa and where that came from.
Well, thanks, Andy. Certainly not 20 years, but this is actually year 5 for us. November, I think 17th is our 5th year anniversary at Macrometa, so I'm excited about that. And it's very similar, I think, or at least there are arcs in the narrative of our origin story that are similar to Akamai's in some ways, I think. I love the idea of how you describe it as shattering the origin and putting it in lots of places. And I can relate because I think just as the web needed a CDN to become usable at scale by billions of people, I think the cloud needs an infrastructure like that. And that infrastructure needs to do for apps and data what the CDN did for content. And that's sort of our origin story, which is Durga Gokina, my co-founder and CTO, and I think it was 2014, 2015, when we were sitting and asking ourselves, what comes after the cloud? I mean, what happens? I know we're at peak cloud right now, and maybe that's the next 10 years, but what do you think the next 5 years after that looks like? And as we were pondering that question, centralization stood out as sort of the biggest characteristic of cloud. And, we've seen enough technology cycles that we know the pendulum constantly swings. And as we started to ask ourselves, what is it that cloud doesn't do so well? It became obvious that as data kind of morphed into more and more interesting and powerful types in business applications, there was a new class of emerging data that didn't fit the centralized model. And we call that operational data, and I think everybody calls it operational data now, versus transactional data, which is sort of what databases and data warehouses, and especially the big giant data systems in the cloud, are really good at doing. And so as we started to ask ourselves the question, what about operational data? Because that is so fundamental to how businesses turn events and activity in the real world into revenue. What are the systems that allow you to process operational data, interactions between devices, humans, and systems, and monetize that? And we were puzzled that there was nothing out there. And when we started to double click and figure out why, it turns out because the architecture and the computer science that's required to do this requires something completely new. It needs the topology of a CDN, but it needs a data architecture and engine that's event-driven in real time. And so we started in 2017, once we had sort of put the core philosophy of how we were going to do this together, by creating a new infrastructure that was fully distributed, sat at the CDN edge, and then potentially down the road on the telecom layer itself, but allowed you to build these new applications that took advantage of real-time events and operational data to create new systems of interaction with end users and devices. The cloud still has its place. The transactional stuff all goes over there. So by the way, I'm shopping for Christmas right now for my friends and family, right? So, operational data is all the stuff like what was I browsing, where, what kind of things caught my attention and interest, And transactional data is like, what did I actually pay for? What I actually paid for will still go into the cloud. But all that operational stuff about where my interests are and how many kids do I have and who am I buying these presents for, that kind of operational data, I believe, really belongs at the edge, because we can build brand new digital experiences using that data that make it a joy for users to use these applications, but more importantly, developers, for them to be able to build these amazing new digital experiences powered by the edge infrastructure. So anyway, long monologue again. I turn into Dr. Evil once in a while when I get excited about these types of topics, but that's kind of our origin story over there, Andy.
Awesome. I love it. And I love the focus on helping to empower developers, because I think that's one of the missing pieces about how do we really get the edge to take on and be understood. So very excited for what you're doing there.
So, Andy, as you said, Akamai is the real OG of the edge. You guys defined this thing called the edge. Well, Dr. Tom and the co-founders did, right? And CDN maybe was the first killer application for the edge, but substantially you added lots of interesting new things on top of that edge architecture, new applications, new capabilities. And 25 years later, obviously the world's very different, the internet's very different. I'd love to understand the progression in architecture and distributed computing. How have customers consumed the edge over the last 25 years? And then, if you can talk a little bit about how the next 10 years might look like from an enterprise adoption standpoint, where are the applications now? Because obviously things have changed so much.
That's an interesting question. So you got a lot in there. Let me try to unpack a little bit of that. So first of all, kind of in the retrospective view, the edge and the internet has changed a ton in the last 25 years. If you go back 25, maybe a little more, 30 years, you as an internet user were looking at FTP mirrors to download content.
I
You were
remember
trying to
those
find,
days, yeah.
yeah, you're trying to find the closest one to you that wasn't busy, so you could download shareware or whatever, whatever Unix piece of software.
I was trying to
you
get
wanted, or open
Slackware
source
those days for Linux, right? That was the first distribution of Linux that I was using, yeah.
Slackware. I was a FreeBSD guy at the time, so similar, and you've got these kind of FTP sites, and you're going around, and so the first application of the edge was really accelerating bit delivery or kind of downloads or bulky objects around the internet. And the early internet, I mean, the links were relatively thin compared to where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
So Akamai, when we think about where our edge started, it started with distribution of software downloads and associated content, images, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's still a big portion of what we do, right? Because there's a lot of that on the internet. But a few years in, streaming became a big part of what Akamai's edge was about. And, there was at this time, people were using technologies like Real Player
Right.
and other, kind of proprietary technologies to stream video on the internet.
Yeah.
And that changed and it became more open. So we had, HTTP streaming standards, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
And then we saw a big push around what I would call OTT or over the top video, where people were watching stream video directly to their TV. Now that's probably most TV, right? So if you think about how TV has progressed. So we moved from a very fixed data platform to a streaming data platform. And all along the way, we've been working on the evolution of what we call edge computing. And, we kind of coined the term. We had a trademark on it for I think 12 or 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we had experiments back in 2003 and 4 with running Edge Java or Java Tomcat at the time instances and WebSphere instances at the time out on our distributed network. Wow. And allowing folks to run chunks of their application out on the edges. Now, I will say, so that sounds amazing, and it was, but the ever-present challenge was lack of consistent data availability at the edge. Right. So you would have this application sitting out there at the edge, and it was just calling back to a central database for everything that it needed to do. And that was incredibly inefficient, and it doesn't really make sense because you're scaling the presentation layer or the application layer, but you're not scaling the data layer, in a co-resident way with it.
Right.
And one of the things, one of the reasons why we're so excited to be here is, Macrometa has a very interesting, computationally based approach to solving how do we make the data layer live out at the edge in a easy, developer accessible way as well. So this 25-year arc has been around moving from, bit offloading to real-time streaming with edge computing sprinkled there. And now, we're really focused on moving compute out to the edge, right? So today, we acquired Linode about the beginning of the year, beginning of 2022. And now we're, taking Linode and we're upscaling their existing footprint, and we're also taking and pushing them out to the edge of our network. And I know there's a lot of excitement there. So if I think about kind of where we're going and where the next 10 years could be, I think we're finally going to break. We finally get all the pieces to have a compelling experience for developers to create applications that actually live on the edge and for users to actually transparently access those. And that is pretty exciting because we haven't had all the ingredients before. And today, Akamai, when we think about how are we assembling our portfolio, whether it's, technologies we own, technologies we partner with, or technologies we purchase, it is about, how do we enable the edge and how do we enable more use cases and applications at the edge? We have thousands of locations of infrastructure around the world today, and managing those and managing the capabilities on them is complex. But we're very excited about all the ingredients being in place for a really compelling developer-focused vision of where the edge is. And frankly, that's one of the reasons, that is the reason, I think, if you think about it, why we're working with you folks.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think I'm in violent agreement. Let me put it that way, that the ingredients are in place, and it's taken a while. I mean, the data problem's been haunting us for years and years, right? And it was only really in the last 10 or 12 years with the advent of web scale and companies like LinkedIn and Yahoo, all of them sort of coming out and needing to solve these really big problems with big data sets, that real innovation started around the idea that we need distributed data computing. And it kind of stalled out at just sort of distributing data within a data center so you could scale out within a data center. But to your point, data, is not a local phenomenon. I mean, if you're an enterprise customer, you're probably operating in a dozen or more countries around the world. You've got operations there. You've got applications that need to be used there. You've probably got applications that serve your customers in those countries. And the notion that we'd go back to a single origin, a single cloud region, and serve all of those types of complex use cases from there seems really weird to me. And so I started to think that the reason the edge is possible is obviously the infrastructure that companies like Akamai provide, the platform like someone like Macrometa provides, right? You kind of just break that stack down. You've got a very, very deep capillated network that Akamai brings, probably the best backbone in the industry today. On top of that, you've got 4,900 or something like that points of presence around the world, somewhere in that region. And then now the combination of Linode with Akamai that brings very computationally intensive workloads close to the edge as well. So AI, ML, lots of compute, lots of databases, and those types of wonderful things. And then we layer on our platform that takes advantage of all of that. And the other piece, which is the timing of the edge, is perfect because we now live in a world where developers are dealing with time-sensitive data, location-sensitive data, fast velocity of data and change. And these are not problems that you can sort of solve in the cloud because of its centralized nature. So I'd be curious to get your take, Andy, on what sort of enterprise apps do you think now become possible in this new world where you've got a powerful platform on which to build these types of apps?
Yeah, so I think you've summed it up well in your commentary, and kind of the overture that I take from that is 10 years ago, distributed data would mean multiple SQL servers replicated within the same data center, right? Literally sitting on a LAN, but replicating their own actions. Now, the vernacular and the kind of cultural, approach has shifted, where when you say distributed data, you mean something much more akin to what Macrometa is doing. And that is a very exciting pivot, and we are pleased to see developers just understand a lot more about how to manage distributed systems, and then having the right tooling to support that. So that is super exciting. To your earlier point, there is a ton going on with how we're thinking about enterprises today and what they're doing. Now, I'm not a UI guy, right? So I can't necessarily, give you, hey, this is how applications are going to change. But what I would say is in the history, like dynamic personalization of what you're using is actually been really limited because it's based on a rendering from a single point. And you're getting basically a central entity or a central region, which is saying, hey, here's what the page for Andy is going to look like, and here's the content that's in that, and here's the weather by him in his general area. But I think with a truly distributed model where we actually have data that is resident at the edge, that can become much more dynamic. And I think that the best examples of this are, if you're ordering something today, like you can literally watch the car driving. Like here it is on the map coming towards you, right? And think about if that approach was embedded in everything you use, where it's no longer about just that one or two use cases where you're like, oh, this is cool, I can see when the delivery is going to be here. But instead, if that kind of data awareness and real-time data access was available to everything you use.
Right.
And so much of what we're doing on the internet today is not localized to you. Your music selections or your television or your video you're streaming, it's really kind of centrally programmed. There's a capability for that kind of consumer media involvement to be much more dynamic. Now, on the enterprise side, if you think about how enterprise and business applications work, I think that's even more true. If you think about, how do you engage socially with people, that today is a very central feeling engagement as well. I think being able to actually have data sharded and distributed correctly is going to enable, a pretty compelling vision of how that all comes together.
I agree. I think you hit on something really powerful with that example, right? And I'm a big Airbnb guy. I've stopped using hotels for a while now, and I always wondered, what if there was a way to securely share data between all these different things that I use online? For example, Airbnb knows I'm going to be in Anaheim, California with my 11-year-old. We're going to be at Disney, what have you. And if that information could somehow be permissioned and shared, in a way that acknowledges my concerns about privacy and things like that, then I would love to have a customized set of digital services and experiences, automatically sent my way. So that when I come into Anaheim, I know that there's a bagel shop right there, right towards the entrance of Disney. That's where we're going to go and have a quick bagel breakfast, and we can go in and enjoy the show, enjoy the rides, all of that stuff. And I just started thinking about all these different ways that operational data at the edge, systems at the edge, can facilitate a much more intimate form of computing, where the systems can, sort of in an ambient way, right, help support our life and functioning. And then, of course, you look at the enterprise side of that. There's so much that you could do with security. There's so much that you could do to sort of up-level people's productivity. I don't see clouds and centralized architectures in that sort of being able to support that level. You can certainly do a lot of AI, ML, and modeling and those types of things over there. But where things run, where things interact with humans and devices, that's got to be at the edge. And maybe a few thoughts on that, Andy. Am I totally off? Am I drinking the Kool-Aid too hard here, or where do you sit on this spectrum?
Yeah, no, I think you're taking a bit of a futurist view, but I also think that's very appropriate. And ultimately, I would agree with you that I think today the internet and the experience of a user is kind of static. And I think that's going to change. And I think it'll change based upon the ability to dynamically create things that are responsive to what users are saying. And from a technical perspective, the core thing that Akamai is after and the core thing that Macrometa is after is reducing friction and making it fast. Right? Because the problem today is the technologies that you would need to do these kinds of very dynamic applications are you either have to invent them yourselves, or you would have to string together 15 things and it's going to be very breakable. I think a bit of the vision arc that we are on is how do we make it so that you can do things that were really hard very easily. And that is, if you think about Akamai, arrogantly, like if you didn't have Akamai, you would have to go set up 1,000 data centers, right? And instead we do that for you, and you can then, click and consume. Macrometa has a very parallel vision to that, where, instead of inventing a data science team that is going to build a new distributed layer, you guys are constructing that layer on top of, frankly, you're on top of Linode for a lot of your technology, which is super exciting. And then you can, as a developer, as any developer, just person in your garage, you can go out and very easily harness the capabilities and leverage. Computing is all about leverage.
Yeah.
Right. And it's about, being able to say, hey, I'm leveraging these technologies below me. And ultimately, the edge is one that we've not struggled with. The edge is hugely important to how the internet works. But having it be accessible to developers, to enterprises, and directly to folks who are building applications, I think that's what you're projecting solving. So this kind of real-time future where what you're viewing and what you're consuming is based on the things that are actually happening around you, I think is very relevant and very, very real. It's where the edge is going.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember reading Bill Gates' book, The Road Ahead, back in like 95 or 96. And literally every scenario in that book requires edge computing to be successful. Yeah, and as you were talking about these things, it just reminded me of that. All right, we're going to move to part 3 now, or depending on whether you start the index at 0 or 1, I think we're on part 2. I can't remember right now, but I want to talk about our partnership next. So let's go there. So moving on now to a topic that is very close to my heart, our partnership and what that enables for customers, Andy. I want to start by prefacing that, I made a comment earlier, and this is sort of a very core belief of mine, that just as the web needed a CDN, the cloud needs a global data network, or a GDN, and that's what we provide. And that's been the guiding, vision for us at Macrometa. For me, the frustration has been, the edge computing and certainly the developer aspect of that edge computing, which is trying to provide tools and frameworks to developers to take advantage of edge. Those attempts have been made for about 5 years now. Certainly, there've been, the ability to build little JavaScript pieces and run them in different pops, but I've seen toys and trinkets being developed by that. I've never seen enterprise class apps, the kind that enterprises invest millions of dollars in the cloud to run revenue systems, right? That support mission and mission criticality, right? Those types of things really haven't come in that programmatic model to the edge yet. I'm excited about our partnership because for the first time, anything you can do in the cloud, you can really do on the edge as well, at the same level of sophistication, reliability, security. And so this concept of a global data network is a really powerful one for me because we're introducing new primitives for programming the edge for the enterprise that make a lot of sense. And there are three parts to this, in my opinion. The global data network is made of three constituent parts. The first one being a global data mesh. Because enterprises have data and customers all over the world. You've got to have a way to connect data across all kinds of boundaries, whether those are physical boundaries of network and data centers. Maybe there are boundaries of different clouds. I've got some data in cloud A and I've got some data in cloud B. There might be logical boundaries like data that is spread over multiple parts of the same organization or over partnering organizations, as in supply chain, for example. A lot of companies collaborate on data across the supply chain. The challenge we have is it's all locked up in silos everywhere. And so our global data mesh, which really is the fastest, easiest way to connect data and make it fungible by turning it into APIs. That's the first piece of our data platform. So you can literally connect through our connection platform, all kinds of data stores, databases, data lakes, data warehouses, legacy of, file formats, streaming data, what have you, doesn't matter. And we get all that data flowing no matter where it is, in which part of the world it is, and what kind of a system it's in. Second part, how do you put an API on that? Because once you put an API on it, you can actuate the data. You can connect it to microservices. You can connect it to mobile and web apps. You can connect it to all kinds of interesting things. And then the second piece of this is edge computing, which is bringing the power of functions and containers with real deep compute capabilities underneath it, to the edge itself. And so we have a complete runtime that allows you to package up your data. In fact, our integration with Akamai is right there, where you can basically build your logic in Macrometa and with a push of a button, deploy it directly onto the Akamai edge worker network, as well as on a Linode to take advantage of different forms of computation and computational depth that are available in these two types of infrastructures. And so this flips the cloud model around because in the cloud, what do? We send data to the cloud as intercontinental distances, right? And we try and make sense of the data over there. The problem is too far away and it's too expensive. Versus in the new model, the compute comes to where data is originating or where it's being consumed through this edge computing framework of ours. And then the third piece is data protection, because we live in a world where data now is a regulated commodity. Nation states are very, very particular about what data is leaving their sovereign boundaries, things like that. And one of the biggest challenges that architects in the enterprise have is, hey, I've got to build an app that runs in 5, 6, 10 different countries. Do I create 10 versions of my app for each, jurisdiction of regulation? Do I then build 10 DevOps teams and then 10 SecOps teams and then 10 of everything, right? Or is there a way to leverage an infrastructure like edge computing to do that where I can securely keep data in region, right? And use policies to transform data on egress, on ingress, and egress, so that I can be complying with whatever the rules are in Germany, whatever the rules are in India, whatever the EU rules are. And of course, here in the US, we're going to get a federal legislation on this, and we're going to get state level legislations. We're going to have 50 different frameworks to comply with. So in my mind, the cloud model is really not going to be able to adapt to these types of challenges. You're going to need an edge platform that is like a global data network where you can connect data, you can move computation to data source and data origin and data consumption points. And then most importantly, you can comply with data by keeping it in region and processing it locally. And to me, these are the three primitives that our partnership and our integration now brings to enterprise. Very differentiated. It's not a, hey, this is the same thing as the cloud. It's really, this is how you can make cloud apps better. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, there's a lot in there to unpack, and I love your passion for this topic. No, that is really important because we're on a hard challenge here. So the passion is needed. I would say that the internet is highly distributed, but still has centralized systems of record. And the challenge is, how do we take those systems of record and evolve them so that they are as distributed as the internet is? Very high level. That's my super high level summation, and that's really the journey that Macrometa has kind of really jumped upon, which is how do we take it so that in this world where you have views of data based upon privacy regulations, based upon user preferences, based upon all performance and topology concerns, based on all those things, data is going to look different depending on where you are, and shoving it all back into 1, 2, 3, or 4 centralized locations is a challenge. And to kind of maybe offer some further commentary, like, I think that edge computing has been around for a long time in a read-only mode. And, at Akamai, we've done a bunch of edge computing that's read with asynchronous writes. But, the real thing that we're interested in is, how do you do edge computing with read and synchronous writes? So that you can, do, hey, I'm committing it here, and that means that I'm committing it everywhere. And those are the kinds of challenges that you folks are after. So I know I'm kind of getting a geeky answer, but those are the challenges that, as much as we talk about edge computing, those are the systemic challenges, which is, how do you do a very developer-friendly synchronous read-write application at the edge? That is the kind of, no BS thing that I think you folks are tackling. We've worked on that at Akamai over the years. And, I think that, combined with your passion for the edge and for your passion for working with customers, that's why we're here as an investor, because we're excited about what you're doing. We're excited about your team and the phenomenal talent you've got. And we're excited for what we can do together with our partnership, right? So essentially, in addition to our investment,
preferred partnership, right?
Exactly right. Our preferred partnership, because we're working together as we see opportunities where customers are trying to figure these things out. And customers, in conversations with our customers, they're continually trying to scale out their applications and their data platforms. And it's fantastic to have folks such as, Macrometa, right? And just be able to bring in the experts to say, hey, here's how this is being approached in real time by folks like Macrometa. And it's a different approach than many folks are used to, where they're used to central systems of record, where they're like, all my data lives in this server. It's like, that's not how the world works anymore. Right. And having folks such as yourselves, where we can go in with both an appealing and compelling technical story, but also a very rational business process, and just kind of how this works from a financial point of view is fantastic. So that's why we're your preferred partners, and that's why we're excited about working together with Akamai's customers, our customers today, and our customers in the future. And also learning a lot from you in the same time about how we work together in this incredibly complex, incredibly technically challenging space.
I wish I was as eloquent as you are, Andy, but that was a great answer. And maybe just a little bit of context and details for the folks who are listening. Our integration with Akamai is pretty deep at a product and technology level. We're announcing today and making available, you can start using it today, the ability to build stateful functions and containers, and with a click of a button, automatically deploy them onto the Akamai network. So, for example, you can build a distributed application. Our sample app that we're releasing is actually a video streaming application. It's kind of like Netflix, but everything runs on the edge, including all those backend services, right? So if you're a video streamer, this is really exciting, because every time somebody logs into your app on a mobile phone or on the TV, you're no longer going all the way to a faraway cloud. All that can be served milliseconds away. And that allows you to build some really amazing user interfaces, interactions that were not possible before. So check that out. And we've also shown the power of integration, because we take advantage of Akamai's locations, video streaming API, and we've created a little watch party capability where several folks can get together and watch the same video. It synchronizes the video so everybody sees the same thing at the same time, and then overlays chat and group messaging and all these fun ways that we can kind of live virtually together, that the pandemic has taught us to do. So there's a really amazing real-world application available over there that takes advantage of all these things, the global data mesh, edge computing, data protection, and packages it up in a way that you can, as a developer, see how to use all of these primitives in a really interesting way.
Let me throw something right back in there, which is, so I love your demo application. So first of all, it's awesome that you folks are putting this together, and thank you for embracing the Akamai Edge platform and the way way you are. I wanted to add one more thing for folks who are seeing this, which is the video application you've built is incredibly responsive. And it brings actually a good mind, which is, when you log in or when you're doing something and you see the spinny circle when you're waiting, if you see the spinny circle, there's one of two things wrong. There's something wrong with your network, or it's not at the edge. That's what's causing that, because you're going back and you're jumping through layers. You're going to some centralized database. There's service chaining to get back to the authentication. When you're using an application like the ones that Macrometa is releasing, where you're actually doing those things at the edge, there's no waiting. It's almost instantaneous. You click log in. It's like you're logged in before you think you're logged in. And that kind of, spinny circle. So, kind of the Andy's guide, like I would explain this to my mother. If you see the spinny circle, there's either something wrong with your internet or the application's not at the edge. So I'll leave it with that.
No, that's really well put. And it's all built on edge workers, actually. So when you log in, it's an edge worker that looks up and authenticates you against Macrometa, for example, and then customizing what to show you. Do you want to watch this movie, this particular show? All of that's hitting preferences in the database, the content catalogs in the database, search on the database. It's a beautiful example, and I encourage all of you to go and see the video workshop that we have along. That's a joint collaboration between the Akamai team and the Macrometa team, as well as, go download the source code and create an account and start playing on the edge with Macrometa and Akamai over there. Wow. So, Andy, it's been such a fascinating conversation, and I'm looking forward to doing more of these with you, hopefully in the future, as we do more interesting things. One of the features that we're building right now that we hope to get out next year is actually composability between edge workers and our SQL platform, our SQL query layer, where you can build an edge function and you can embed that in the SQL and use that like a transformation function within the SQL itself. It is going to create so much of expressibility and the ability to solve very complex data problems at the edge, by being able to query, by being able to take a piece of AI ML code, for example, and code it as an edge worker function, and then directly embed that as an embedded function, a user-defined function in our query language itself. I'm really excited about what developers are going to do with this. I think in a year, we're going to see some amazing new things that folks have built on top of the edge on Macrometa and Akamai.
It's very exciting. And it's, I've seen the demos, I've walked through it with you and your team, and it's really cool. First of all, again, thank you for coming up with such flattering and just really showing the capabilities of the edge. So you folks are doing a great job there. It's really interesting to see. And I think it will be interesting to see how it's embraced, because candidly, we're trying to lay the groundwork here, right? We're trying to figure out how do we enable people to do things with the edge that you couldn't do. The real exciting thing is going to be, what does it look like in a few years, and how's it being used, and how's it changing the dynamic of how applications are constructed?
Yeah. One last question, and then we can call it a day, which is, tell us a little about Linode. I've been a Linode customer before you guys acquired Linode. We've been on Linode for 4 years now. In fact, we've built a lot of services that are specifically taking advantage of Linode, at a hardware level, for example. Our storage engine, is built on top of something that's pretty interesting on Linode. I'll maybe write a blog post about it at some point. But, it's obviously a very big bet on the edge. Love Linode, great developer-focused company. What are you guys planning with the Linode acquisition? Where does it go?
Yeah, so, first of all, our Linode acquisition is also, and this is kind of, I'll tell a very brief story, I'll keep it kind of short, but it's about us being passionate about the edge, right? So one of the challenges is just having an edge is kind of not enough. You need to have tiers. And, we've always had a edge. We've had, what we feel arrogantly is a superlative edge, but we have an edge. And we have kind of a next tier inside that, but we didn't have a tier that was more centralized. And by more centralized, I mean on the order of 24, 48 locations. We have thousands and thousands out at the very perimeter of the edge. We have hundreds in the middle, but we didn't have that kind of central core. And, we were just so impressed by the folks at Linode. And in full disclosure, I've been a personal Linode customer for like 14 years, 13 years there. So right. Good track record. We've been watching them from afar via that. But it is incredibly important to us that when we think about how does an enterprise host compute? And how do you host compute so that you can easily use the edge for workloads and for applications? And that's really what we're after with Linode, which is we're after building a continuum of compute where you have centralized capabilities for your AI, ML, data warehousing, your things that are going to sit in the center and not have data that doesn't have a lot of velocity. But then you're going to have that middle tier and the edge for the actual application engagement from users. And again, that's kind of a longer term vision. I mean, that's not a product that's coming out next year, but
Right.
we're right now focused on, frankly, scaling up Linode because,
Mhm.
compared to Akamai, they were relatively small companies. So we are scaling them up both in staffing and in scale of operations. And we are, really, we're moving a lot of Akamai's applications to Linode, things we had on other clouds, because we're
Right.
we're really pushing it first. We're obviously folks like yourselves. We're growing to meet your demands as well. And it's going to be really exciting because now we feel between our compute capabilities, our delivery capabilities on the CDN side, and our security capabilities, and then with key partners such as yourselves, we are in a position where we're really a one-stop shop when you want to run a high-performance distributed application on the internet. And it's super exciting, and having you folks as a preferred partner is just absolutely essential to that. So that's where we're going with Linode, and it's going to be an interesting journey, and we're thrilled to have them on board.
It's going to be exciting for sure, Andy. Well, thanks so much for this wonderful virtual fireside chat. I've learned a lot. I'm even more excited, and I didn't think it was possible. So, folks, thanks so much for joining Andy and me for this conversation over here. Feel free to reach out during Developer Week. There are lots of resources for you to interact with us and learn more. We love your feedback, so try the integrations, please, and build something, and we'll showcase it as something that's incredible and very unique to the edge. We'd love to talk to you about all those things. And thanks for being a part of all of this. See you all soon. Bye.